Yeah, g'day guys, Steve here from Dirt Bike ADV. It's a Sunday afternoon, just out in the shed, just come out to put some new bark busters on the Tenere. Obviously you realise I've had a bit of a get off and broke one of the handguards. Got away pretty luckily with it. But the Tenere's actually been in the naughty cupboard for a couple of weeks. It's been, it's been punished for flicking me off. 80% rider of course, 20% bike. But yeah, thought I'd have a chat about bike weight. Something that's very important, so something I bang on a lot about, you know. It's sort of always been big with me. In 1988 I bought an 86 model Tenere, so it was an XT600 with a bigger tank, I think longer forks, electric start, more comfy seat and a little rack out the back. I bought one of those, took a year off working and just travelled up the east coast of Australia. After being on that bike and living off that bike for a year, and while it was a good bike, it was very, very top heavy. And something like 160 kilos with 300 kilometres of range I worked out, so quite a heavy bike. At that stage in my life I said if ever I buy another adventure bike I'm just going to buy an enduro bike, put a long range tank, a comfy seat on it and build a rack for it myself. Obviously back in '88 there wasn't too many options, but obviously now we've got thousands of options. So obviously fast forward sort of to 2005, my son wanted to get into dirt bikes. And as we've gone on for the next 5 or 6, 7 years, we've ridden dirt bikes, the two strokes and most of the brands. Obviously he's now turned 18, he's actually now 20, and as he moved on and started riding with his friends more, I went and started looking at adventure bikes. So obviously from my experience in 1988, I decided I needed to get an enduro bike of some description and turn it into an adventure bike. I only kept that Tenere for about 2 or 3 years, so I didn't have a lot of riding experience, so the lighter end of the market appealed to me as well too. So when I started looking for an adventure bike, the first place I looked was something like a 250 WR, a nice light bike in my opinion, or a Honda 250L or a Rally, Honda 300 Rally or something like that. And certainly the Rally 300 Rally looked the best to me, but I looked at that and it was 152 kilos with 300 kilometres of range before you put racks on it and wider foot pegs and all that sort of stuff. I went, oh hang on, that's a 286cc engine with a 152 kilo wet weight. I went, oh gee, that seems excessive. So I sort of jumped on the internet and just jumped on and had a look and just looking for a 450 or 500 of any brand. I wasn't particularly fussed. I know all the brands are good, there's not a bad brand on the market. So I ended up coming across a Beta 480 and obviously I put a comfy seat on that, I put a tower on it and just turned it into an ADV bike. And it worked very well, 133 kilos with 300 kilometres of range. It was a very light adventure bike. Obviously its limitations were it wasn't good at the touring, just sitting on a highway for 2 hours and beelining it for 5 hours or doing that sort of stuff, and felt like that I was going to be racking up a lot of oil changes and whatnot. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think back then if I just had gone and bought a separate dirt bike or thought about it a little bit more, I might have kept it a little bit longer, but I think I'd done the right thing and I went to a 2-bike policy. So bought a 390, had to buy one brand new and bought a 690. So the 690 was the adventure bike and I had the 390 for a little bit of light adventure work, but also a dirt bike so I could be ridden in single trail. So obviously I was really happy with the setup, decided to go to a 480 instead of the 390 because I just felt like as a 100 kilo bloke and carrying a bit of camping gear that I was actually working the bike a little bit hard. So I thought, yeah, I'll go to a 480. The prices were good, so I sold the bike for a good price. And then obviously the 690, I was in the same mode. I thought, right, while the price is good, I'll sell this one. I'll wait till the prices drop second hand and I'll buy a later model one with the extra counterbalancer. So that was where I stood about sort of 6 months ago. Decided I couldn't go 6 months without a bike, so I needed to buy some sort of cheap bike so I could at least keep doing a bit of adventure riding, if not something else, you know. Come across this Tenere 660Z and thought, yep, that'll do me. It's a bike I've always loved the look of. Thought, yep, that'll do me. Bought it quite naive, not really knowing how heavy they were and what they were designed for and that sort of stuff, but bought it and went through the process of setting it up. It was reasonably well set up to start with, but just did a couple of little mods to personalise it and just trying to lighten it a bit. But at the end of that, with a 300 kilometre range, it was still 207 kilos, so a much heavier bike than I'd expected I would ever ride. But as I've worked on the bike, I've realised that it actually is a touring bike. So there needs to be a differentiation between a touring bike and an adventure bike. And for me, that differentiation starts at 150 kilos. If your bike is above 150 kilos before you've set it up, it's a touring bike. I'm learning that lesson as I go along, but this Tenere, as you're aware, I had the get off, is 207 plus all the gear. I can't pick it up by myself. On that trip, I did go into the sand and have a bit of a try in the sand. Not a chance in hell would you ever ride a bike this heavy in the big deep sand. This is a little desert. This is the worst sand riding in Victoria. The sand's that deep, and the ruts are, you know, inverted like that, and so you've got a wheel track that wide, and if you wander off that wheel track, your front wheel's gone. So love riding the sand and dirt bikes, but not on an adventure bike. So I turned around, and obviously down the track a bit, I was trying to go around the back, had me get off. So this is a touring bike, as is any bike in my opinion that's much above 150 kilos. So when we look at the bikes, I just go through them and see what they weigh and what they weigh with, you know, sort of a 300 kilometre range. We look at the Tenere here, it's 207 kilos with a 300 kilometre range. The T7 is fairly similar, a little bit heavier, 210, 211 with a 300 kilometre range. We go to something like a 790 or a 890, again they're getting well above 210, 212, well above 200 I should say, so they're 210, 212 with a 300 kilometre range. We go to, and so you sort of go through them all, and most bikes from then on, in my opinion, are called touring bikes. So if you want an adventure bike that you're prepared to take off-road, virtually anywhere off-road a four-wheel drive can go, you've got to start with a bike that's below 150 kilos. So when we talk about the bikes that are below 150 kilos as adventure bikes that we can do a little bit of touring on, there's not a big selection, to be honest. Obviously the first choice and probably the best choice is the 690s and the 701s. As you're aware, with my 2018 model, with a 300 kilometre range, that was 161 kilos. That's with a tower on it, a good rack, some nice pegs, and a extra 6 litre tank in underneath the seat there. So that was set up quite well. So that's really viable, 161 kilos. The other one, of course, is the DRZ 650. Again, starts well below 150 kilos. So if you wanted to chuck a fairing on it and a bigger tank and maybe a rear rack and that sort of stuff, you probably, I haven't actually weighed a DRZ 650, so I don't know, but I'm guessing you're going to be up around the 160 kilos as well. And then the other option, and really the only other option in my opinion, is the AJP PR7. They're a really good option in my opinion. Quite old technology engine, pretty solid engine. The old Huskies certainly don't seem to be having too many problems with those old Husky engines. But a bike that comes with 17 litres, sitting down nice and low, and comes with a fairing, comes with a navigation, tablet, and just nice wide foot pegs and a big comfy seat, and set up with a strong subframe to carry a load. So they're a really good option, and probably, they come in at about, I think, 160 kilos again, 600cc engine, 160 kilos, pretty well set up though, the same as the 690. So, and obviously they don't have the horsepower that the 690s do. I think the 690s have about 75, and the PR7s have about 63 with a power kit on them or something like that. But obviously the PR7s are considerably cheaper. So there are your three options: the Husky 60, 690, the DRZ 650, which has gone out of production, and of course the PR7. So yeah. So overall, guys, I think there's three critical things for me, and that is for an adventure bike, it has to be able to go off-road and be able to do the touring. So it has to be just able to cruise down the road for 5 hours straight without batting an eyelid, and have passing power and just the ability to sit on open roads and be reasonably comfortable. The second thing is it needs to be light enough that I can go off-road by myself. So I can get out from underneath the bike, I can pick the bike up by myself. So, it's basically, that really does limit the weight. And the third thing is here, and this is one I bang on a lot about, and that is the lighter the bike, the more fun I have. You see the big GS 1250s, and listen, they're nice looking bikes, I get it. The guys bolt shit all over them, bars and bloody bags and lights and all the stuff, lots of bling. But you've lost the fun factor for me. When the bike gets that heavy, it's no longer fun anymore. I like riding dirt bikes, and I want to take dirt bikes adventuring, so you need to be able to do that on an adventure bike, and that ain't a 1250 GS for me. I'll never own one of those bikes. But there is another couple of things to consider. All bikes, whether it's a Honda Tenere 660, a Honda 300, a GS 1250, we all have one thing in common. All those bikes have roughly the same tyre patch. They might vary a little bit, but basically they all have the same tyre patch. So if you're trying to get up a hill, go through some sand, go through a slippery patch, through some snow, whatever you're doing, if you're trying to propel a 110 kilo dirt bike compared to a 300 kilo GS, you know what's going to happen. So you've got to remember that regardless of what size bike and what the weight is, that you always must remember that it's only the size of the tyre patch that drives that bike forward and can obviously slip that bike out as well too. And the other thing I think is really critical is how they carry the weight. The mistake the Tenere has made with the T7, or Yamaha have made with the T7, again, they've got that hunchback bike. We've got 16, 17 litres or whatever they are up high. Same as my 86 model Tenere. The fuel is up high. Fuel is one of the bigger, heavier parts. Full credit goes to KTM, 790s and 890s, fuel tanks down low, much better feeling bike. I recently went into a local dealer who sell Husqvarna and they sell Yamaha. I grabbed the T7, I stood beside the T7 and went like that on the handlebars. Oh, that hurts the shoulder. Ooh. Like that on the handlebars and just shook it. No fuel in it, just sitting there undelivered, so it hasn't got fuel or oil or anything in it. I went over and stood beside the Husky 901. Did the same thing, just grabbed the handlebars, stood beside it and rocked the bike backwards and forwards. The Husky nearly fell out of my hands, it was that light compared to the T7. I know the T7 Rally Series, they've dropped the fuels a little bit lower, but they've still got a long way to go. So the 901, even though that's 890 cc's compared to the T7 690 cc's, so much lighter to ride, obviously, because there's lower centre of gravity. And that's where the 690s are good, the PR7s are good, because the fuel is down either, in the case of the 690s, the fuel's underneath the seat. In the case of the PR7s, the fuel's down below the seat. So that helps with the handling, the actual lean value of the bike to pick it up and all those sorts of things. So all these things need to be considered. This is my opinion, guys. This is where I'm at. This is a touring bike. When you get below 150, you can call them an adventure bike, in my opinion. Only my opinion. Anyway, guys, that's enough waffle from me. Thanks for watching. We'll hope to see you out on the trail soon. Probably.